I would like to take this opportunity to welcome East Edmondson to our podcast, and we're going to be talking about several subjects, but one of them is the non-binary world. And so thank you, East, for joining us. I appreciate that.
Thank you for having me.
There are two questions I ask of every guest just to get their input onto it, but what generation are you in?
Generation Z.
Z. Great. And so, how do you think your Generation Z is perceiving uh, the world?
Um, I don't know. I think there's my view is that compared to what I've heard from my mom's point of view of how the world used to be like, I think the world is more progressive now. I see the world as a very nice place. There's definitely things that could be better. There's things that could be worse, but I see the world as a very bright thing. I like
Right.
being in this world. I like the generation I'm in, but
One of the other things that I've been asking is, do you, as a ex Generation Z, do you have any thoughts on the aging process or the philosophy of aging?
aging happens. It's
Right.
you can't
Yeah.
really stop it, can't reverse it, can't make it go any slower, can't make it go any faster. Just kind of happens at the rate it's at, and you just have to learn and grow with that.
Yeah, I think I'm part of the boomer generation, so I'm quite a bit older than you are on the spectrum of generations. But I think one of the aspects that I find and appreciate about the Z generation is that you guys are really more open to things and a little more progressive in thoughts and movements. And so that's what I really appreciate about the Z generation is that they're going to probably change the world as well as the millennials. So that's great. Absolutely. So,
Yeah.
how has your personal journey evolved that has led you to this point in your life?
Um, well, when I was younger, I identified as female for majority of my life so far, and I liked a bunch of boys.
Uh
And
huh.
then all of a sudden in fifth grade, I liked my girl best friend. And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
what is wrong with me? Because I had never heard about the LGBTQ plus community. And so I was scared why I liked this girl when I identified as one myself. And so I went to my mom sobbing while we were at the beach, as one does. And she's like, it's fine. I like girls too. And I think from there, like I learned a lot about the community and found myself more as a person because when that first moment happened, I was so confused and didn't know what was happening. And
Sure.
then now I'm I feel confident in sexuality wise. I like whoever I like. I identify as pansexual. Gender wise, I don't have a term a full term that I'm well, that sounds perfect yet. It's just
Right.
non-binary, transmasculine, umbrella term, transgender. But I think the way that it has evolved from me being scared of, oh my God, I like someone who identifies the same as me, to me now being so open and I know who I am. I think that's was a very like good personal journey for me
Mm-hmm.
because I found myself, which feels very good.
So, if someone is having a similar journey as yours, what kind of advice would you give them?
Whoa, sorry. It's got a call on my computer. Advice wise, I'd say if you have, or if you have a good support system or people who will understand, that's how I found myself. I had my mom, I went to her, asked or mentioned that I liked this girl, and then she told me about the community, and I was like, oh, okay, so it's not wrong. This is a thing that exists. And going from there, then I started having more friends who identified the same or just in the same community, and I learned more about identities that way. And then I had a friend who came out to me as trigender,
Hmm.
and they talked about non-binary then as well. And I was like, oh, actually, that sounds a lot like how I've started to feel about myself, or like how I've kind of
Sure.
felt for the past year. And so, like, finding that those people that are like feel similar ways, or like
Right.
the internet. I use the internet a lot to find like different terms, which is where I found transmasculine and like pansexual. I didn't know what that was until, well, seventh grade, I think. But I used the internet to find that.
And so
So
help me understand in our audience, transmasculine, what is the definition of that term for LGBTQ plus community?
it's, how does, well, the way that I use it is, um, oh, a rough definition that I found. Granted, I found it 4 years ago now, so I do not remember exactly, but it's
Right.
like um, a term for people who feel more masculine. And in this case, since I'm non binary, but leaning more towards the masculine side, it seemed fitting. Because I'm like, I'm not,
Right.
it sounds weird to phrase it this way, but I'm not fully trans,
Right.
like as people identify like female to male, male to
Hmm.
female. I'm still, they, them is like the top,
Hmm.
which is where the non-binary comes in. But
Right.
yeah, transmasculine is like the feeling of masculinity, I guess, as a
Right.
shorter definition.
Well, transmasculine, I think, would probably be something about where you are and what you identify with, more masculine, more feminine. Neither one of
Yeah,
them are good or bad. It's just your
yeah,
individual journey that allows you to probably feel more toward the masculine side or no side or to the feminine side.
yeah. Because it
Um,
is definitely a spectrum. There's not like you are feminine, you are in between, you are masculine. There's different levels to it.
actually, I think that's a great reference, the levels as well as a spectrum of where people fall on these categories, evidently, that people like to put us in. And so that
Yeah,
necessarily doesn't mean that that is the only definitions. And I think for my generation, we had to take a really hard look at getting out of those definitions that society has placed on us. So I think you have the advantage of doing the spectrum, uh, of knowing that and identifying within that spectrum. And a lot of older GLBTQ plus individuals did not. So I think that's a great aspect and maybe something that hopefully we have spearheaded, that you're able to do that now as a Generation Z person. So pansexual, what, help me understand that a little bit, the definition.
for me, I just kind of use it as like I love anyone regardless of gender. I know
Right.
that like pansexual and bisexual are very similar, in, like definition wise, but pansexual feels more like a fluidity. Like I don't
Hmm.
really care. Like
Right.
if I didn't know somebody's gender and then I found out their gender, it wouldn't change anything, and it feels more freeing than bisexual, because bisexual is normally stigmatized as you like masculine or you like feminine, and there's not like that spectrum that's often talked about, because I do realize like bisexual is not that, although that is what a lot of people think. But I think pansexual, yeah, it feels more fluid than what bisexual is known as.
And I think that's a good point you brought out, East, is that the bisexual label either goes to the, on the spectrum, to the far feminine side or the far masculine side. And you're either, liking both, but in that is a spectrum of why you like the individual, why you've chose this person to be your partner, and how that can affect individuals now coming in, that they have those choices. And I think that's an excellent definition and an excellent example of that. Thank you. Non-binary. So that's another term that maybe our individuals listening to our podcast might not know the definition or what that means. Could you help me with that?
Yeah, so I say the way I define it because I know other people that I've talked to don't
Hmm?
define it the same way. But for me, it's just like that middle point where I don't feel like too feminine, I don't feel too masculine, though I'm more lean on that side, but it's like that middle part where it just kind of feels like I'm existing in like this cloud where I'm not
Right.
stuck to one side.
Right.
Uh, Although, of course, because society, there is still that, oh, you were born a female, you are such,
Hmm.
or you were born male, you are such. But I think for me, it's like the they them pronouns is um, very freeing because it's not stuck to one or the other. It's just kind of that middle point.
And it reminds me of uh, the porridge little fairy tale where it's either too hot, too cold, but it's just right. So I think the
Yeah,
non-binary is the just right for some individuals. So that's
yeah,
great.
for sure.
And I think that's how you really identify and able to have that identification is very important, especially for younger individuals that are within the LGBTQ plus community. So,
Yeah.
how has your journey impacted yourself and others?
Well, for me, it's made a lot of things make sense. But like on on my mom's side of the family, the people like the immediate family is very understanding and they get it and they try their hardest to do it. But then like the further family, like great aunts and like great grandparents don't really get it. So there's kind of like this barrier because they will like refuse to use pronouns or refuse to use the name I prefer. And same with like my dad's side, except they're slightly worse. Like my grandfather on my dad's side refuses to use preferred name or pronouns at all because it goes against his ideas of what people should be.
Right,
And there's definitely been like Facebook things posted that were very targeting for like specifically trans individuals.
right,
And so there's been like this impact of, oh wow, it feels like my family hates me because they don't get my gender or sexuality identity. And so there's been like, it went from a very loving and very close like relationship to kind of distant and like we don't really talk anymore, but if we need to, we do,
right.
which super sucks because I love my family and I know they still love me, but it feels like there's less love now that
Hmm.
I'm myself.
Right. Well, I'm saddened to hear that because all of us tend to experience that at some point. Stacy Rice, is the trans woman that I interviewed for one of our podcasts, she's from North Carolina. And she said, I have relatives in North Carolina that are Trumpsters, very conservative, but they still love me. And I think that is interesting in the concept how you can have these definitions and these biases but still love the individual. So that what we
Yeah,
have to do is we have to get rid of the biases, and
yeah.
hopefully that'll come about. Um, how do you think just being yourself is part of overcoming the biases? But how else do you think individuals who have this type of bias might help bridge that gap with their family members? Do you have any sense of how to do that?
I mean, seeing as I haven't been able to really break that
Through
with my own family.
right.
I'm not really sure. Although I know, like, within, like, during COVID, um, I had some other family that was more like, I don't understand it and I don't care to understand it, but they've more so come into actually using my preferred
Hmm.
name and pronouns because I
Right.
think they realize, oh, this isn't just like a phase, because I know that a collection of them was like, they they're not going to stay this way forever. Like, this
Right.
is just a phase. They're going to grow out of it, and then they'll be the perfect granddaughter, perfect kid again.
Yeah.
But I think especially because, like, most of the family that doesn't support me lives in Nebraska. So the Midwest, which is where those super strong ideals come from, because that's the way they were raised in, like,
Right.
that state. And so, like, not being able to see me for that long and only seeing like online things of like things I was doing, which
Hmm.
included some like uh events for the community, they're like, oh, well, maybe we should start understanding more so that,
Yeah.
like, we don't totally ruin things,
I think one of the
basically.
things that I've seen is that individuals that have younger children, and those younger children much more accepting of
Yeah.
individuals. And so sometimes they've been able to educate those individuals and say, it's really no big deal. We're all individually in doing it. It's the older generation, such as myself, that we don't have that perspective sometimes of having younger individuals or others point out things because our environment is such, like you said, in the Midwest, that it's very entrenched in those conservative type value systems. And I
Hmm.
think we're going to have to break away from that. There's been some successes. I have a cousin of mine who, 60, late 60s, um, became, her son also is GLBTQ plus, and she was a conservative type of Christian background, came very supportive. And now she does the hug mom hug movement is in that
Hmm.
one, P flag, which is great. And then my little 92-year-old mother, back when she was 80 something, became very supportive of myself and my husband. So I think that's really, uh, there are little bright spots out there, but we have to look for those. But hopefully your generation will not have some of these things as other generations transition out. So, which is good. So, how do you think when when you identify as non-binary? We've talked a little bit about that. That represents that you're in the middle, so you really don't have the labels. I guess, is that correct?
Yeah.
Tied to do that. And so, how does that make you feel, just not having the labels as part of your identification as yourself?
I think for me, it just feels more freeing, as I said earlier,
Right?
because
Uh-huh.
the labels feel like you're kind of trapped in a box that,
Yes.
like, society has given you, which society's views on things isn't always the best, with like anything, including like gender or like body image.
Hmm.
And I feel like being able to break away from that box and have like this spot that feels like me, it's, yeah, just like a freeing feeling. And it
Right.
feels like I can more, what's the word I'm looking for? Like, move around more, I
Mm.
guess, and like be
Yeah.
able to explore myself more because I'm not confined in this tiny box of
Right.
who I should be when that's not who I feel I am.
One of the things that I'm looking at for future episodes of podcast is rural versus urban. And I think the experience of maybe uh, being non-binary and part of the LGBTQ plus community is probably much easier than in urban areas that it is in like the small community that I grew up in. So I hope to have a discussion at some point about the challenges that those individuals have versus urban challenges. So look forward to that episode as well. So what are your thoughts on youth transition, and do you have any plans to transition yourself?
Youth transition, I mean, if somebody knows who they are, that, like, I hate stating it this way, but like that young, but like if they know who they are and they know who they want to be, I don't see any problem with youth transition, although I know many people do. It's like it gets put onto the parents, like, oh, it's the parents' fault. Why are they letting their kid do this so young? Like, they don't really know who they are. But I've met like plenty of people who were like 11 when they started transitioning, and they're happy and feel totally free now that they've grown up and like they went through puberty with
Hmm.
being who they are. So I feel like, but yeah, my thoughts on youth transition in short are very positive. I know there's like maybe some cases where like in the end it doesn't feel right for them, but then they, like the people I've seen where that is the case, they've just been able to detransition and go back to an identity that fits them.
Right.
And for me personally, I hate the thought of needles and like surgeries, but I have thought about like top surgery for 4 years
Hmm.
because binders can be very uncomfortable if you wear them for long periods of time, which is
Absolutely.
normally when I wear them
Right.
because it's when I go to like weddings or go out to like fancy events and they can go for super long periods of time and the binder just gets super uncomfortable, and it would
Right.
be nicer to be able to just like not have to deal with it, but also not feel super dysphoric about having a visible chest that other people can see.
Right.
Um, and like with any sort of testosterone, yet again, terrified of needles. That probably won't happen, but it has been a process that's crossed my mind. But at
Hmm.
the same time, that's needles. Although
Right.
I know that there are like pills, and I don't remember if there's testosterone patches or not, but I know there's other options. But
Right.
testosterone has been like a, would I really want to do that in a transition or not? So I think for
Yeah.
now, that's not a plan in my transition, but hopefully
Yeah.
someday top surgery will
Okay.
occur.
Well, it's still an evolving process, I'm sure, for you on that.
Yeah.
Do you have any trans individuals have been that you have looked up to or used as role models for the Gen Z?
Um, there are a few people. Um, there's Alex Aaron, who's like a Instagram influencer, social media influencer, and I looked up to him for a really long time, and I was like, that's gonna be me someday. I'm gonna be able to feel completely free and like have top surgery and like have people understand and like know me as me. And then
Hmm.
there's also in the music video for the Village by Rabel, there's an actor that was there who's trans. I believe his name is August now. Um, I I lost his social media, so I don't remember if there was a name change or anything. But I also looked up to them for a really long time because I was in that music video. They show like the start of their transition, which I was like, oh my god, that's how I feel. I'm like, that
Yeah.
feels so cool to see it like displayed in a music video that is exactly about like not feeling like yourself and wanting to feel free and not having like family understand. So
So it appears to me that trans women tend to have a little more exposure than trans men um, in the media world and social media, and
yeah, I
especially
think,
in the entertainment. So
yeah, I see a lot like on TikTok, which I use quite often.
yes.
There's I see more trans women than I do see like trans men. So there are also a few of them that I follow, but I think the majority of the ones I see that are at least open about their identities, because I know some people aren't,
Hmm.
um, but the majority of them are female, which they're also my role models, but not in like the same way as a trans man would be,
Right.
because like seeing how happy they are in their transitions, I love to see it, and I'm like, I hope that someday I feel that happy and confident, but not in that transitioning to feminine that they
Yeah.
do.
Yeah. Absolutely. I hope that, and my goal for it, for the LGBTQ plus community, is there's no label for anybody. We're just all individuals and human beings.
Yeah.
So hopefully we can get to that point, and do that. But yeah, it's a process, and LGBTQ plus individuals have led the forefront just because we're courageous. To be honest with you, we've put
Yeah.
ourselves out there and doing what we need to do. Um, so, how can individuals in community assist in making a difference within the non-binary trans community?
Well, I know with non-binary at least, if more people could be understanding of they them being like a singular pronoun for somebody, that would be wonderful, because like if you see a wallet on the ground, you're like, oh, this person forgot their wallet, I wonder whose it is. Like if you don't know what they look like, you commonly use they them pronouns for that said person, and you're talking about a singular person in that case. So like understanding that that is a thing that can happen even if you're looking at somebody would be probably like the biggest difference that would that could occur, because I see that's a lot of people's like issues with the non-binary community. It's like it doesn't make sense to use a plural pronoun as somebody's singular pronoun even though it already exists as such when you don't know what a person looks like. But I think moving that knowledge to the non-binary community would be making a huge difference.
Well, it's something we need to strive for. And something I've learned a long time ago is the lens I look through things. And sometimes I have to really put a different lens on to say, oh, we need to look at this situation this way, or I need to be honoring of the individual more this way to do
Mm-hmm.
that. So hopefully we'll be able to switch the lenses a little bit when it comes to supporting the non binary community in that way. So I think you're absolutely right. We need to look at everybody as just being a person, and
Yeah,
the labels aren't there. So that's great to be able to do that. Does the LGBTQ plus community encompass the non-binary community? And if it does, is what's it doing right? And if it doesn't, what can we do to make it more inclusive?
I think with the community I'm in, uh, like in Southeast Portland, well, in Portland, Oregon in general, it's very open with the community. But I know, like, if I go back to Nebraska and I find like the community there, it's different. But in Portland, at least, I feel like the non binary community is very supported and like welcomed. Because in Bridging Voices, in my LGBTQ choir, um, there's a lot of people who identify as non binary and they feel totally welcomed and safe there. But then, like, if I went back to Nebraska, it would feel less welcomed as an identity.
Right,
And I think it's because that same idea of they them doesn't work for a singular person,
right.
or like there's more boxes.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that thought process doesn't really happen, at least in the community I found here, is they there's a large amount of us, so it's just kind of knowledge that's swept across
Mm-hmm.
the community. So it feels more open to like new things, as well as like neo pronouns feel more supported in Portland. So I
Right.
know like a lot of people I know don't personally use them, but there's a lot of like stories from friends that I hear about their friends, and they feel mostly safe with that as well.
Good. I think it has to do with the culture a little bit east. Portland culture tends to really honor differences and individuals, and those individuals do feel supported. I think the culture back in some of the rest of the states is not there. Might be in large
Yeah.
urban areas, but not in the other areas. And so hopefully that culture will grow within those areas where it needs to, so that we can all be the same. But you're absolutely
Yeah.
correct. I think Portland is a different culture for that.
Yeah. It's
Absolutely.
definitely one of the more open ones I've been to because both my parents like to travel a lot. So I've
Yeah.
been to most of the states. There's still like a lot in on like the East Coast that I
Hmm.
haven't been to, but most of them, yeah, the culture, especially around like the LGBTQ plus community, is completely different than here in Portland.
That's right. And I think one of the aspects of that, because I came from Texas, which is very conservative now, but I think it has to do with the Christianity views within those states as well. And there tend to be more black and white, and not understanding there is a lot of in between the two, and that it's
Yeah,
okay to have that in between, our gray area. So I think that's probably one of the major difference I've noticed since I've been up here in the Northwest, is that we tend to have a much better culture of acceptance than some other places. So, how would you describe the future for the non binary in other generations?
I have a lot of conversations with my mom about how it was like for her in high
Sure.
school and listening to that compared to like what my experience in high school was. I feel like the LGBTQ plus community is becoming more welcomed, and same with like non-binary. I have
Right.
like some people on TikTok that I follow where when they were super young, it just didn't exist openly. It was like if you knew about it, you knew about it. If you didn't, well, shucks, you don't know about it.
Yeah.
Um, so I think then compared to now, it's grown more as like a thing that's known and a thing that's like welcomed into the community. And I've noticed it's become a very common identity for a lot of people who don't feel like either box of like feminine or masculine fit them. Because I think majority of people I know who are, well, aren't like in the box of being cisgender or aren't in like transgender, they commonly identify as non-binary compared to like gender fluid, uh trigender, and all of these I there's too many for me to remember to name right now, but all of these other like non-binary type identities.
Right.
I
Well,
I think it's like grown so far from then to now that I feel like it's based on current views and like conversations I see people having, it'll just continue to grow in the future and become a more common thing to like talk about and to see and to have support for.
I think the really good thing that I've seen about it is, because my age group, there were, you were either gay, straight, or lesbian. There were no other terms out there.
Yeah,
I didn't know what bisexual was growing up, and came much later. So it's good that we've expanded our views of what sexuality means, but what the person means as well. And so I'm very pleased to see that happen. And again, I just hope that continues, that we're going to be accepting of the individuals, that we understand that not everybody can fit into these boxes that society has created
for
for
sure.
us. So, when you, as a non binary person, how does that reflect in like dating or other types of things? I know we talked a little bit about it just being the person, not
Hmm.
tied to that. Is that pretty well how that affects you in the dating arena?
Well, in the past, like I had dated somebody who identified as like a man when we first started dating, but throughout the relationship, he wanted to try out they them pronouns, and I was like, okay, I'll still love you the same. And so we did that, and then like he realized, never mind, that doesn't work. And so he went back to them eventually, but um like he just him exploring didn't change any of my views on him. like
Right.
exploring his identity. And then like I met somebody online because of course my generation is online. Well, I've met multiple people online, but they identified as like non-binary and uh like with so like they she pronouns,
Right.
and it didn't make me love them any less than like this other person I had dated 2 years 4 years prior. um
Right.
and like right now my current partner is gender fluid with like they he pronouns, and I'm like, cool. Like that's your identity, it fits you. Like I'm glad that you're able to feel comfortable with that. And I know there's been like from the time we first started dating, there's even been question of what he feels fits them. So there's been like some changes in what they use to describe themselves, but I don't love them any less.
Well, that's just so beyond my concept because I didn't grow up with that and doing it. So I just really am just in awe that you are able to do this. That's have these discussions and do that. So that's amazing to me that we have come this far within the LGBTQ plus community that we're able to do that. Do you think the Generation Z is a little more in tune with social justice type of such as rights for others, Black Lives Matters? Do you think you are more of a generation that's going to really take the social justice banner and go with it?
I mean, from the like the friends that I have and the people I know, there is definitely a lot of like support for social justice. Like I had so many friends, and like myself and like my mom and my younger sibling, we would go to like the Black Lives Matter marches, and we'd and like protests that we knew were would be safe, because for a while they were unsafe and we wouldn't take a 10-11 year old to that and put them in danger. um, but I know a lot of like my friends and myself tried to show as much support as we could and tried to like get things to change, and we still are working towards that because it's not something that's easy to do, since there's so much past traumas, I guess, or like past ideas that are really hard to move from. But compared like from I don't even know how many years ago, but when I was younger, like probably 10 years ago compared to now, I do see like a lot of change, and especially like support with my generation trying to help things like move forward in the thought process and like get better if we're able to do that, because it is extremely hard to change people's like thought processes on things. And so we know it's not going to be easy at all, but there's still that hope that at least some things will change, and some things will maybe not get better, but be okay again, or like, okay, finally.
And I think that for me, I've seen a step backwards. We had Roe versus Wade. We've had that one law in many years. We had the gay marriage going on and the
Mm-hmm.
taxes, and I see that stepping back a little bit, um, especially with the Supreme Court, U.S. Supreme Court. So I think it's going to have to be all generations coming together for social justice because we put
For
up the
sure.
fight back in the 80s and 90s when we were trying to get just AIDS, for example, trying to meet the needs for those individuals and make the government responsive. Now we're going to have to go back and do the same thing for equality for marriage. Women's
Mm-hmm.
rights, I think, is taking a heavy hit with what has happened. So I think we're all going to have to get together and come together to make a social justice change in the U.S. for that. And I think
Yeah.
it's going to be reach across it. It's been a great pleasure, East. Thank you so much for being part of the discussion, and good luck. And hopefully we'll meet in person one of these days.
Yeah, and thank you for having me. This was a very cool thing to do, and I'm excited that I'm able to be a part of it.